So we've been doing this podcast, Gordon and me, for over 4 years. We have never had a general manager on our podcast. So we're very happy to have our first general manager, and so he'll always be first in our minds. Dan Evans, who was a general manager for the Dodgers back in the early 2000s, but he's done so much in baseball that I probably could spend 20 minutes just talking about the million done, and I was to meet Dan at the Sabre conference in Minnesota this summer. He's graciously agreed to come on. Gordon, I have a lot of questions for him. So, Dan, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much. Thanks to both you guys. Deep down inside, I'm just a big baseball fan who happened to make a living, on the game my entire adult life. And I never anticipated having a career more than 40 years. But the thing for me, guys, I just love the game. I love the game. I love the people in the game even more, and I love the history of the game. So I've listened to you guys. I think you guys are a lot of fun. I don't agree with everything you're saying about the
Good.
strike zone and about some of the stuff about the Hall of Fame, but that's part of what makes the sport really fun.
Oh, I'd love to start there. Go ahead, Gordon.
I was going to say, man, that is the dream. We started this podcast pretty much because we talked about baseball so much. It bugged my mother to the point where we needed to do this just so that we didn't have to put her up for it. And then we made her produce the thing anyway.
Oh, I love it. I love it. I hope you're taking good care of her.
We are very grateful to our wonderful crack producer.
Executive producer.
Very nice.
And technical producer of the podcast. I'd love to sort of, touch on some of the things that you said about, where you don't agree with us. But we started the podcast, as people might know, because we started thinking that Ty Cobb should have had a much better average in the seventh, eighth, and ninth innings because he was facing tiring pitchers. So finally we went back and I think, and we found that really wasn't the case. That they just hit.
Yeah, and that's a baseball reference trip, I'm sure.
Oh yeah.
Of which I'm a brand ambassador, and I'm really, as Kathy, my way better half, always says, there are some really deep rabbit holes in baseball reference, and I know where they all are, and there are no ladders where I go. But the Ty Cobb thing is a great example of, that's 100+ years ago, guys. Just think about that. And we can debate Ty Cobb versus Willie McCovey versus Harry Hooper versus Ichiro. And I don't know that other sports do that as well or as often. Just being in Sabre, for me, one of the most fun things about Sabre is there's 40+ committees, and some of the things we talk about, there's a very small amount of people on the face of the planet that want to talk about it. And then other things, there's thousands of people who want to engage. And I find them all pretty darn interesting. So, you talk about Ty Cobb. See, I think one of the coolest things about the Hall of Fame, and I'm partial because the Hall of Fame has been something I visited 7 or 8 times, and one of my best friends in the game, Josh Rawich, is the president now. Before that, Tim Mead, another great friend of mine. There's only been 23,000+ guys who've ever played the game.
We know.
And only 273 players are in. And when you think about, the 1.1%, what do we debate? We're debating great players as to whether or not they're great enough for us. It's kind of like going to an ice cream shop and going, Mark, I just don't think that Oreo is exactly what I want right now. And you go, screw it, I do, and that's what I'm getting. And I think, when you look at like the current ballot, there's going to be people who don't think CC Sabathia is a Hall of Famer. And I'm okay with that. It's like, okay, if that's where your bar is, I'm okay. But I look at Sabathia and I look at some of the other players. I know you guys talked about Felix a couple weeks ago. And, I just think everybody's got their own bar, and so do the baseball writers. And sure, it gets complicated, but I think its complications are what make our sport so much fun.
I think you're so right. Like the fact that we get to sit here and have that discussion on you get to compare two guys and say Felix Hernandez and CC Sabathia and sit there and go, well, which one of them is not only better but deserves to be in the Hall of Fame? Which honestly, probably both of them deserve to be in the Hall of Fame because if you're looking at AL pitchers from the late 2000s into the early 2010s, they're pretty much the best two. And if I'm going to say Verlander and Scherzer deserve to get in the Hall of Fame from this era because they were the best two pitchers in the American League, I'll kind of have to say that about Sabathia and Hernandez, a decade earlier.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you know what we're troubled by too? We're troubled by being a numbers game.
Mm-hmm.
And our whole world, as we've grown to love the game, has been set on 300 wins and 500 homers and a 300, 400, 500 triple slash. And our criteria is changing. I mean, it's just different. It's when you look at today's starters, you guys touched about this a couple weeks ago. Garrett Cole is going to have a different bar than Clayton Kershaw, is going to have a different bar than, Greg Maddux, Tom Glavine. And it's amazing how much the game's numbers have changed. I was looking a few weeks ago, I was in an airport, I was delayed badly, and I was looking at the upcoming Hall guys, and it's Posey, it's Yachty, it's Votto, it's Wainwright, a lot of really good players. And if you keep the bar where it's been for the last, 80 years, it's hard for a lot of those guys to get in. And there are always going to be people who like a smaller hall or a bigger hall. I'm more a fan of a bigger hall because I think it celebrates our sport. But I also think there's inner circle guys that are just dudes, Ichiro for me is the hit king. I mean, he's got more hits than Rose. I saw him when he was in Japan, and he's playing, 25, 30 fewer games a year than Rose, and was a better player than Rose for me. And, I was around him, so I know what he's all about. But I think everybody's got their arguments. Is Lou Whitaker a Hall of Famer? Is Tommy John a Hall of Famer? Is Utley a Hall of Famer? And I tend to look at guys like Felix. Felix was done at 33. Done. And I was there when he was in A-ball, and I was saying, we got to get this guy to the big leagues as quickly as possible because this guy is as good as I've ever seen at 18 years of age. And sure enough, at 33, he's done.
He had a lot of miles.
And yeah, and I think we celebrate greatness in our game really well, but we also put these boundaries on guys. Andrew Jones, if Andrew Jones doesn't have the cliff fall off in his career, and was it steroids? I don't know. No one really knows. But he stopped being Andrew Jones. Well, there's some people who look at that and go, not a Hall of Famer for me. I'm actually one of those guys. And because I think the Wick was great, but was it long enough for me? No. But it doesn't mean he wasn't a great player. It just means that for whatever reason I just don't see him as that guy. But if you look in today's game, I don't think Freddie Freeman was a guy that most people thought was a Hall of Famer until 2024. And then all of a sudden, everybody's going, wow, this guy's numbers are ridiculous. Freddie Freeman's been a first ballot Hall of Famer for years, right?
Yeah. And I think you also run into an interesting thing, like with a guy like Felix, who retired at 33. Guys now, because of how difficult the game is to play at a high level, As
Yeah.
soon as you start hinting that you're done, they're going to get you out of there. They're not going to give a guy who might have lost a little bit running him out year after year. There's only one Bartolo Colon. There's not going to be a lot of
Yeah.
guys that are going to figure out how to reinvent themselves in their late 30s. There's going to be a lot more guys that now only have a 10, 12-year career and they're done at 34, 35.
Yeah. And the money gets involved. You know, the guy's making 15 to 30 million dollars a year. He's great. And
Mm-hmm.
suddenly he's not so great. And, you know, there's a level of expectation from the fans, from the player, from the team, and all that stuff factors in. And I just think it's one of the really cool things about our support is that I think our sport celebrates itself better than any other. And I'm a huge hockey fan, a huge basketball fan. I am not a big football fan. And I see how those sports celebrate their greatness. You know, the top 10 NBA players of all time. I've seen them all play. And it's really fun for me because I go, you know, hard for me to imagine X over Y. But in baseball, I haven't seen most of them play. And yet I'm like, oh, come on. You know, you can't tell me that he was better than him. And I think it's one of the reasons why the numbers are so awesome in our sport, but the eras are so different. I mean, Ruth, imagine what Ruth and Gehrig faced in the last, you know, 4 innings of games on a dominant team with, you know, the racial barrier there, no segregation, no black players in the game, no Latinos, and no people from Asia, no people from Latin America. This is a different sport. So for me, I hear all the arguments and I tend to think from 1947 forward, it's the best brand of baseball because we got to see everybody play.
Mm-hmm.
You got to see Jackie, you got to see Frank Robinson, Louis Tiant, Minnie Minoso. And I think that's why I celebrate the game the way I do, because I happen to believe that, we're in a golden era of the game. And I think sometimes you don't realize that. This is an elite era in the game. We got 20 plus active Hall of Famers right now. And I think we never know that until long after they're retired. But if you look right now, I think it's kind of like the 71 All-Star game
Wow.
where, I mean, I happened to go to that. My dad took me to 1971. And I mean, I was a kid and I couldn't believe Clemente would go upper tank the other way. I couldn't believe Jackson could go up on the roof. And, these are guys I grew up on. And now I look at today's players. I mean, there were 24 or 25 Hall of Famers in that game. I don't think we're that far off in today's sport. I think we're right there.
And then there's guys, I always think about it. You were talking about you using statistics to celebrate the history of the game. And like, there's gonna be guys like Jacob DeGrom is gonna be an amazing story to tell my kids. Be like,
That's right.
he's not in the Hall of Fame, but you never saw the greatest pitcher who ever pitched. And like, that's exactly something that you're able to talk about because you're gonna be like, look at this season he did 15, 20 years from now, and people won't believe it.
I totally agree. And I think it's one of the, every player is different. Their stats are different. Positions are different. You guys touched on that a couple weeks ago when you talked about third basemen and how they're underrepresented. And, so why is Arenado, such a good candidate? Well, plus Arenado's a damn good player. I mean, and he's been a great player for an extended period. But I think the magic of the sport is that everybody kind of thinks they're right. The three of us won't agree. And I think it's the beauty of the game. You can sit in the stands and watch a guy and go, man, I love watching this guy play. And he doesn't have to be a Hall of Famer. He can be a really good guy. He can be Tommy Edman and you go, I really appreciate this guy. And then, the superstar goes 2 for 21 in the postseason, and it doesn't make him any less of a player.
Right,
It just means he had a bad stretch of time.
right, right. When we evaluate Hall of Fame players, we say that the playoffs can help your Hall of Fame case, in our opinion. It's not something
Yes.
necessarily, but to us, it's like Andy Pettitte, who I've kind of been down on for the Hall of Fame. When I add in the postseason stuff, like, am I just being mean to Andy Pettitte because I'm a Met fan and he played for the Yankees, and that he really he was never really the number one pitcher on the Yankees when he was there. It was Clemens. There were other guys that always seemed to be the guy they valued more, even though he was the playoff pitcher. And you know what? Damn it, playoff does matter. And being good against the best when it counts the most, well, God, no one would know that better than you. I mean, that's what you want, and that should be valued and considered.
Well, but think about some of the guys who never got the shot. Banks, Williams had a very small window. There's been some amazing players that never got to the series.
Yep.
And, it is such a team game, so different than basketball, so different than football, so different than hockey, where you can single-handedly come in and change a team at one position. We require 8 other guys to bat. So, I think it's fascinating when people point at guys like that, but some of the magic of the game are the guys like Hurricane Hazel, who, had an unbelievable Milwaukee Braves 4 months. Lou Johnson with the Dodgers one year, when Willie Davis went down and he went off. I mean, Sweet Lou went crazy. And these guys become, you guys mentioned a couple weeks ago, Kiki. I mean, if Kiki played 162 games a year the way he does in the postseason, Kike Hernandez is in the Hall of Fame.
Definitely.
But instead, we view him as just an extraordinary post-game or postseason performer. And I think that's pretty darn cool. I mean, you look at some of the guys who just didn't do a whole lot. I mean, I love when people, rip on Billy Wagner. I mean, are you giving me a break on this one? Billy Wagner had a very small window where he was in the postseason. Is that Billy Wagner's fault? No, it's his team didn't get there. And Wagner sputtered a little bit, but you know what, guys? Most guys do. Most guys in the postseason just don't excel because it's hard to excel in the postseason. Talking about the best players on the best teams and all the pressure in the world, I think it's harder than ever to be great in the postseason.
And one of the things I think you were saying in terms of just even getting there, we as baseball fans love to give kudos to guys that stick their whole career with one franchise. We elevate those players, but then we'll turn around and rip a guy because his team didn't make the postseason, as if he's somehow supposed to like single-handedly chase it or change that.
No question.
We'll talk about ring chasing is bad unless it works, and then we'll give you all the credit for going out and winning that ring.
You're so right. You're so right. And it's funny because we do elevate those guys. We elevate those guys. We love him because he's that guy at work who lasted 40 years at work that everybody loves and everybody comes to his retirement party, right? Because he's touched generations and everybody sees that guy and says, I really love this human being. But then these guys who play on 5 or 6 teams, we look at them and we go, well, I don't like him quite as much. Well, come on. I mean, there's a reason, especially in today's game, he only can play one position. If he can't play that position for another team, he can't play there anymore. So it's like, okay, let's not penalize guys for their greatness. Let's recognize, who they are. And I think that's why, as a result, I just think what you guys do is something that my friends and I do all the time. I have one friend who just tells me there's no way Jose Ramirez is a Hall of Famer. And I just go, oh my God, like, why isn't he?
What did he
You're
do to you?
telling me I don't
He's
know.
not.
I don't owe him any money either. And it's like, and that same guy, when I talked to him about Mookie Betts, he just hears me as, being a Dodger cheerleader. And I'm like, are you kidding me? Mookie Betts is one of the greatest players of his generation. And it's like, but this guy really knows the game and loves the game. But it's just like, this is not a steakhouse. We don't order the same dish. Everybody's ordering something a little different. So I
Yep.
think it's the magic of the sport. I mean, guys, Yadier Molina, you look at his numbers, Yadier Molina is not the lock compared to Hall of Famers in the past. And then Buster Posey's in right around the same time. Buster's numbers are nowhere near the levels that we expect catchers in the Hall of Fame to be. We've got to change as a game what we celebrate, or else we're going to inadvertently not have people from eras of the game that are just as great, if not greater, with more challenges than ever before. And we're weighing them with a higher bar than most other eras we've seen.
The evaluations we use now, it's better, right? We've had Sean Foreman on the podcast a couple of times, Baseball Reference, and so he and Jay Jaffe at Fangraphs, they have helped us understand that what we're looking at isn't always what we think we're looking at. It's not. We grew up there, right? 500 home runs, batting 300 and all that. So now we're more sophisticated as fans, and we understand that, isn't that? So if you were to look, as you said, at Yadier Molina, or you look at Buster Posey, maybe to a lesser extent, the statistics for the audio are like, well, gee, that doesn't look like what I thought a Hall of Fame catcher was. If we're not going to have those guys in there, we're not going to have any catchers in the Hall of Fame anymore, right? Because
Great call.
we're at the point where we're making it so exclusive, everybody's got to look like Mike Piazza playing defense like the greatest catcher in history. Which I love Piazza, belongs in the Hall of Fame, but the defense was always the thing that was his bugaboo.
Yeah, I always feel it's the top 1 or 2% of whatever era you're playing. And, that bar is going to change and our measures are going to change. We're never going to see another 300 game winner. It's going to be really hard. We're never going to see that. Okay. But that doesn't mean today's guys are any less than guys from 20, 30 years ago. The Maddox, Randy Johnson, Glavine group, I think is the last of its group.
Right.
I don't think we're going to see that 300 game winner. But does that mean that Verlander or Kershaw aren't great? Oh my God, in many cases, they're even better. And I think we as a sport have to be careful that we don't get too precise in our measurements. And that's why, and you alluded to it, Jay Jaffe's stuff on Fangraphs is incredible. When he writes about candidacies, I think it's extraordinary. And it puts things in perspective for me. And I've seen all these guys play for or against my team. So I feel like I've got a real good feel for the player. And I walk away sometimes going, man, I whiffed on this guy. I didn't realize how elite this guy truly was.
Well, you didn't trade. I'm sorry, but you didn't trade Adrian Beltre because you let the guys after you take care of and I got to believe you got to be happy, like I wasn't me.
Yeah, I had some guys who didn't like Beltre when I was there with the Dodgers, and I couldn't believe it because I knew I was seeing one of the greatest players of his generation. And one of the hardest things to do as a general manager, guys, is when the bulk of your people don't agree with you. Your subjectivity to come to your decision is sometimes something you can't quite put a finger on, but you just go no. And it's really funny with A is that, he left the Dodgers and then he came with me to the Mariners. and we got him on a 5-year contract. And I had people in LA saying to me, what is it that you see about him?
Even then.
Yes. And this is after about a 48 homer season. He was second MVP, and they just didn't think he was that guy. And, you know, this guy's getting close to the Hall of Fame 7, 8, 9 years ago. And we were talking one day before a game, and I just said to him, I said, when did you know that you were pretty damn good? And he goes, well, I always thought I was pretty good, but I was never comfortable thinking that until the later stages of my career. Because he said, I'm not one to reflect. And I think for most players, guys, you know, they don't go into the 25 season going, well, I've got to do this and I've got to do that, or else I'm not going to be in the Hall of Fame. You can't play to get into the Hall of Fame. You got to just play. And some guys, expectations drown them. Some guys, the pressure drowns them. Some guys just can't stay healthy. Other guys, we tend to penalize them if they play a long time. What do we call them? We call them collectors. Oh, they collect
Compilers.
numbers. Compilers. One guy calls him a stat head. And I'm like, okay, so you get 2,800 hits in your big league career and you're not good? I mean, you got to be in the lineup enough to get 2,800 hits. But Beltre's a good example. Beltre was not a guy his first 5, 6, 7 years that you could see as a potential Hall of Famer. And I think it's one of the great things about our game is that some guys evolve. And when they do, you just go, wow, okay, I got to appreciate this guy. Because, you know, how many guys come on the scene like Soto? How many guys come on the scene like Felix, for me, Gooden? You know, most guys don't come in that way. I mean, Trout got sent down. Guys guys hit speed bumps early in their careers. Some guys recover, most don't. And, you know, I think part of the joy of our sport is that, you know, is Dustin Pedroia a Hall of Famer? Well, if you think he is, you're gonna look at some other guys like Ian Kinsler, and you're gonna have to have an argument why they're not. And I think I love that. You know, as a baseball reference brand ambassador, I blatantly love StatHead. I love the compilation of numbers.
Yeah, yeah.
But guys, you know what? I mean, we all have different flavors that we like, and I think that's part of what makes our game so attractive to so many people all around the world.
I wanted to ask you about some GM stuff, Dan. When it came to the Dodgers, I noticed when I looked at the history that Jim Tracy was the manager there before he took the job. I think there was an interim GM, it was Dave Wallace. The pitching coach was interim GM.
Yes.
He left the
Yes.
organization. You came in. Jim Tracy was there, and he lasted all this. So we always think about GMs coming in and inheriting a manager, and what's that's like. And 10 baseball fans like us tend to think, oh, that's not always the best way to do it. But maybe talk a little bit about that, not just in the context of Jim Tracy, but in general from the GM perspective.
Yeah, it's a super question. You know, one of the hardest things about the game is the GM/manager relationship. It's a real challenge because the one guy is making decisions, the GM, based on what he thinks would be in the best interest of the organization and would be best managed by the manager in his style. So when you make decisions as a GM, sometimes a decision that you like isn't something that the manager will utilize. You know, maybe he doesn't believe in sitting veteran players, or he doesn't like platoons, or he doesn't like a bullpen by committee, or he doesn't like a running game. He likes to sit back and wait for the 3-run homer. So I think one of the challenges I faced is I had an opportunity. I had 2 other GM jobs offered to me at the time. And I decided to take the Dodger job, which looking back was the right call. As my father said at the time, which one is the best of the three if it's above average or better? And my dad was right. I mean, the rebuilding the Dodgers is something that people still give me credit for and that I'm very proud of. But rebranding the great Dodger brand was even better than the personnel challenge. It was bringing the Dodgers back to being the hated Dodgers and, to do things one way and outdevelop, outsign, all that kind of stuff. But when I came, I had never worked with Jim before. And Jim and I weren't a perfect match. There were things that I wish he would have done differently, and probably things that he wished I would have done differently. But professionally, we were really good together. I had Terry Francona kind of in my back pocket. I had hired him earlier in my career as a White Sox guy in the minor leagues, and I love Terry, but it made sense to keep Jim. And then when the team was up for sale, I couldn't have made a change anyway.
Right.
So, I feel for people who feel that they can't manage without their own people. Pat Gillick is one of my heroes, guys. Pat Gillick is one of my real mentors of my career, a great Hall of Fame general manager. And Pat gave me some great advice. The midway point of my career, he said, just figure out what people do really well and then augment that with some of your people who do other things really well, because there's real good opportunity to gain from experience. So what I tried to do throughout my career, instead of trying to wipe the slate clean, I tried to take the performers that I inherited and work well with them, and then sprinkle it in with experience and people who I knew really well. But guys, what I hated is I hated people who were yes men. I loved contrarians because they challenged me. I mean, some of the best moves I ever made, I was in the minority. And I had people going, "No, Danny, I don't agree, but it's your call. And we'll stick behind you, but that's not what I would do." And a couple times I was a little defiant and said, "Yeah, that's what we're going to do." And then a couple other times I just said, "No, I'm not comfortable with that, and I think you're right."
Because I was always wondering about, like, the GM relationship with the rest of the team and the players. To me, has to just be so interesting because you're somebody that's just as intimately connected to the success of the team as the manager and the players. But unlike the manager and the players, you're not with the team on a daily basis involved in the same way. And that has to present such a sort of like unique challenge because you're not looking at things on a 1 year scale. For us, when a guy gets demoted and goes back to the minors for a year, that feels like forever. But over the course of a 15-year career, it's not actually that much. So you have to look at things not in the same scale of time as everyone else.
Outstanding point. I think the biggest challenge of being the top person in a baseball organization is you're the only person who's thinking about short and long term. The manager, the coaching staff, the support staff are about now. The players are about now. Your scouts are about now in the next few years. Your responsibility is to do what's in the best interest of your organization, both for the near term and the long term. And sometimes they collide. And sometimes, like you can make a bold move, but it sets your team back for years. And that's not always financially. Sometimes it's prospect wise. Sometimes it's philosophically. When I inherited the Dodger mess, we were a disaster. I mean, it was terrible. Our top three minor league teams had left us. Our scouting and player development was among the worst, if not the worst in baseball. And this was an organization that everyone tried to model themselves after. And we had lost our way. And at the same time, the team that was once all pitching and defense was now anything but. We didn't defend well and we didn't pitch well. We tried to outslug and we tried to outsign instead of develop. And when I came in there, so many of the great players of the past had been shunned and had been pushed aside in favor of a new way of doing it. And I just felt that part of the magic of the Dodgers is their history and leaning on those guys. So I did a lot of things like bring Sandy Koufax back, bring Duke Snider back, bring Maury Wills, bring um, you know, guys like guys like Fernando, who had been pushed aside. And I wanted former managers, coaches, players, I wanted them to feel good wearing the uni again. I had a secret weapon in Vin Scully, who, bridged all their careers. So he would introduce me to guys and bring them to road games. And I could stand around the cage and hang out with a guy and realize what made this guy great. He'd stick around 3 or 4 games for the series, and then he'd come the following spring, and it was magical. It was like, okay, now I know why they were so good. But I also had people like Buzzy Bavasi
Hmm.
as an advisor, George Genovese as an advisor, Rod Dado as an advisor, who kind of knew what it looked like. And I'm really lucky Steve Garvey, Ron Say, Steve Yeager, a lot of really great Dodgers of the past. I sat around with them and said, guys, I want to come back and I want to be really special. I don't want us just to be good. I want us to be elite for an extended period. And part of that has got to be, you guys coming back to the fold. So, Fernando is a great example. He was persona non grata. Duke Snider sat with me in San Diego for a series and said he wasn't welcome anymore. Sandy Koufax telling me, I haven't been invited to spring training. They don't want me back. And I'm just thinking, what's wrong with this picture? Are you kidding me? Part of the reason why I wanted this job is having those people around. And, now when you see this, the postseason and you see Dodger Stadium, who do you see? You see all the great Dodgers of the past because it's once again okay. And if anything, I'll be very honest with you, what I'm proudest of is restoring the brand and restoring who we were and had gotten away. And now, they're back to being that team. And I love the way they've done it. And their manager, one of my favorite people in the world.
Hmm.
And he was one of my acquisitions.
I
So
know that.
there's a real link for me to this current Dodger team.
Did you have to and were you allowed to and apologize for the way that these guys were treated and to say, well, it's not going to be like that anymore. I'm here. I want to tell you it's going to be different because ownership might say, don't be apologizing. We're not doing that. And I know the ownership was a little funky when you were there, so I don't want to get too deep into that.
Yeah. I was really lucky. I had phenomenal people that I was working for. Bob Daly was the chairman. He was an unbelievable guy. Bob Graziano, the team president, was awesome. I loved both of them. And, they knew that I was contemplating other things. And I just said, in order for me to do this, I want to do this a certain way. I want to bring back the Dodger mystique and I want to take pride in player development scouting, being internationally a leader, a pioneer. And, they encouraged me. They said, hey, go get it. Go get it. So you ask a good question. What I did is I was really upfront. Wasn't passive aggressive with the guys who had been pushed aside. And I just called them and I said, what's it going to take for you to come back, for you to feel good about wearing the uni again? And guys, I had a big advantage. The team had gone wayward. I was in my early 40s. I was the youngest GM, they'd ever had in the history of the franchise. I was coming off of a really good string with the White Sox where I was really successful. but I also brought a different way of doing things. I mean, in the clubhouse, yeah. Interacting with the players, yes, of course. Um, Highly interactive in the clubhouse, off the field. I developed relationships and I sat in the stands during the game. The first 4 or 5 innings of every ball game, I'm in the stands. Spring training, I'm in the stands. And my reason is I just wanted to bridge the gap between the front office and the players that had gotten so wide that people like Sosha, Say, Garvey, Koufax, Duke Snider had suddenly weren't welcome. Oh my God, of course they're welcome. And I'll tell you guys, if you don't mind, one of my favorite nights was my first full year in spring training. I retired all the big league uniform numbers that were retired. I retired them in the minor leagues too.
Oh,
And my reason is nobody gets to wear, number 4 anywhere in
right.
the organization. Nobody wears Tommy's number 2. But then I brought all the living uniform retired players and I had them talk about what they did and how they did it and what was so special about being with the Dodgers during that period. And it was fascinating to see, guys in the big leagues for 10 and 12 years learn about some of these guys and their greatness. And we did footage and we put them in an auditorium with all our minor leaguers and all our big leaguers. And all of a sudden, at the end of that spring, I felt the vibe. It was obvious that, when Duke Snider came on the field for BP, everybody knew who the hell he was and also knew what that number 4 on the right field wall meant. Gary Sheffield came up to me one day and said, "Man, this guy could hit." And I said, "Oh, yeah." He goes, "I had no idea because I wasn't studying the history of the game when I was a kid." And I said, "Hey, this guy is still vibrant. He can still help you." I mean, he gave Sean Green a great tip that led to Green hitting 49 home runs. So I think, if anything, guys, I confronted it head on. And I had Vinny, who I knew really well from my days with the White Sox in Drysdale, who, he and Vin were inseparable. And I just told Vinny, I want to bring back this mystique and I need your help. And I mean, are you kidding me? Maybe the greatest ambassador in the game's history. The guy's magical. And he would take me to lunch with somebody and I'd hear stories. And then I was telling Kathy 2 nights ago, my first off season, I go down to fantasy camp and it's about 30 former Dodger players, 12 of which had played with Jackie Robinson. The first night we were in the clubhouse at 4:30 in the morning, they were telling me Robinson stories and it meant so much to me because here I'm learning not from the history books. And, I'm living in Pasadena. I'm living a mile away from Robinson's childhood home. I was totally aware of Jackie. I'm a Jackie historian. But these guys are telling me about what it was like and what it was like to travel with him. And I found it fascinating. And I remember coming back home after that trip going, man, I wish that would have never ended because it was incredible. Here I was with the true, Brooklyn Dodgers stars. And to have that opportunity really helped me set the tempo for what I wanted to do the rest of my time.
That's really cool. When you're talking, I'm sitting and thinking some of what you're talking about reminds me a little bit of when I used to listen to Ralph Kiner talk about, on air for when he was doing Met games, riding the trains and the stuff that he did, and you felt like you were in touch with something that happened long before you even knew it was going on, and that's what you're kind of doing here. It's getting into like these guys were talking about Jackie because they knew him. They were
They
his.
played with
That's
him.
right. That's right. Well, and just, getting to know Rachel Robinson, who's just an unbelievable human being, and hearing the stories, and listen, guys, I mean, I love the history of the game. Okay, so that for me is I'm scary. Okay, but to hear the oral history, to hear about the ups and the downs and everything, like Maury Wills in his 10th year in the minor leagues. Why are you going to switch it? Because if I don't, I probably never get to the big leagues. And hearing from Lasorda, who never really got that opportunity and, couldn't break that great Brooklyn Dodger rotation and got nudged aside by some left-hander, Sandy Koufax. And and I love Tommy. Tommy, I adored Tommy. But Tommy had his own reasons for being as passionate because Tommy didn't get that chance as a player. And, Tommy and I would have lots of fun. Oh my God, lunch or dinner with Lasorda, the greatest thing in the world. But also, I'd get the stories from Tommy saying, hey, that guy called you. He's a rotten SOB. He is not a good guy. You don't want to bring him back here. Or other guys who were kind of nondescript bit type guys where he would say, Danny's fallen on hard times. He would be a great guy to bring back here. My luck, though, guys, I had a phenomenal staff. I had Kim Eng. I had Bill Bavasi. I had his dad in the wings. I had AJ Preller. I had Matt Slater, one of the great decision makers with the Cardinals. I had Don Welke. I had a great scouting staff. I had people that were just elite at what they did, and I let them do their job. But they also embraced the challenge we had, which was take this beat up franchise and bring it back to where it should be. And I luckily had the right people in place to do it with me. And that's the way it wasn't me doing it. It was me being a part of a really great thing.
But let it also be said that the year after you left the Dodgers, they went 71 and 91 and finished in fourth place in the NL West. So it's not like you didn't, you had taken them from where they were to where they got, and they had to go through another down before they could reemerge to become the Dodgers that we know today.
And I won't say that I didn't enjoy those 91 losses. I did. I still lived there. I loved LA. I loved Dodger fans, but they had new ownership and they turned out to be misfits. And I kind of saw that coming. And I wasn't, I decided I'm gonna fall on the sword. I'm not gonna do things their way. That's not what I was hired to do. I'd be compromising my values, and I just thought I was at too early a stage in my career to basically just conform to keep my job. And one of my friends on the golf course said, it was a day I'll never forget. He said, so all you got to do is slash payroll and slash some of your staff and you keep your job. And I said, yeah. And he goes, so why wouldn't you do that? I said, because I'd have to slash payroll and I'd have to slash staff. And those people joined me and I acquired those other players. I'm not compromising myself. And he said, well, then you're going to have to go work somewhere else. And I said, yeah, I'm good with that. I'm totally good. So when you talk about the 91 losses, I remember there was one game I was in the stands and the guy next to me, a great scout, I was working for the Mariners by that time. And he said, so you're rooting against him? I said, oh, yeah, a little bit. Absolutely. I said, they fired 190 of us. I mean, come on now, I mean, how can I still root for that team? But now with the current ownership, Stan Kasten at the top, great people throughout the organization, many of which I hired, they're still there. I root like hell for the Dodgers. So it's like, for me, yeah, I can be a chameleon. I can hate them and love them, and it's not it's not that hard. It's pretty easy, actually.
So I'm going to just stop for a second because I think if you'll agree to it, we're going to have you come back because there's so much that we haven't talked about, and we don't want this to be too long a sequence. But I wanted to mention about your course for general managers and some of the things that you've been doing since, which I thought was a really interesting. And maybe you could talk a little bit about that in terms of what made you decide to come up with that and how it's been received and used in Major League Baseball.
Well, I appreciate you asking me. One of the things when I stopped my time as general manager of the Dodgers, I wasn't even 45 years old, and I just decided I've got so much more to do and to contribute and to learn and to contribute to the game. And I want to make sure that I use this platform that I've been so lucky to give. I want to make sure I do something with it the rest of my career. And I had opportunities to run teams. Very honestly, they were either with owners I didn't want to work with, cities I didn't want to live in, or both. And I got to be picky because I had worked for one of the greatest franchises in all of sports. And I just wasn't going to lower my bar to soothe my ego. It was like I've already done something really cool. I love where I live. I love my friends and my family. My first boss was Roland Hemond. He was one of the greatest ambassadors the game's ever seen. Guys, he was a three-time executive of the year. Phenomenal man. A role model for me on and off the field.
And a guy who should be in the Hall of Fame, by the way.
I agree with you 1,000,000%, or as a friend of mine says, 110%. And I got a phone call from him about 12 years ago, and he said, Danny, you got to start giving back. You got to start giving back. You got to start grooming people. Guys, I had 3 or 4 Hall of Famers as my initial cluster of bosses. I had Roland Hemond, Dave Dombrowski, Tony La Russa, Dave Duncan, Charlie Lau, Bobby Winkles. I had the greatest group of mentors in my early 20s. I started when I was 20 years old, and 4 or 5 of those people became general managers, became Hall of Famers. And he said, Dan, you've been so lucky. He said, look at who you got to learn from. You need to give back. And I said, what does that look like? And Roland was my career mentor. And we were at the winter meetings, and he just said, I don't know what it looks like, but I think it looks like giving people like you at age 20 the same guidance and the same support so they may someday be the same. And I said, wonderful. So, quick story, at the winter meetings, I go to listen to Gillick speak in this like conference. And I had already worked for Pat. Pat already knew I idolized him. And it's really weird to gush over somebody you work with, but he was that good. And I'm in the back of the room, and Lynn Lashbrook, who owns Sports Management Worldwide, comes back and says, I'm sorry you don't have a credential to be in here. And I said, well, sir, I'm the assistant GM of the Mariners. I'm just here listening to one of my heroes. He goes, I know, but this is a select conference. And he goes, what do you do? And I told him. And he goes, well, let's talk afterwards. Stay here, enjoy. So afterwards, he says to me over lunch, he said, we'd love to have you think about teaching a course. And I said, doing what? And he says, getting into baseball. 12 years later, we have over 450 people working in the game. Oh. And every 8 weeks, I get a new set of people from all over the world. We sell out almost every single 8-week period. And they have become my little boys and girls throughout the world who I support, nurture, mentor. And now they're becoming general managers, scouting directors. They're becoming big league managers. They're pitching coaches. And guys, I have to be honest, I love it. I love getting those phone calls. Hey, I'm interviewing with the Royals. Can you help me? Sure. The advantage I have is I probably know the person with the Royals, and I can call them and say, hey, this is a really good young woman, or this is a really good guy. just give them an opportunity. I know them very well because I've immersed myself. Well, now, 10, 12 years later, now I have a legacy that I'm so proud of because I go to the winter meetings in a couple days and we have a sold out baseball career conference. And it's a lot of it is because of what we've done over the last 12 years, but it's also a place that people know they can go and get a leg up against their peers as they aspire for jobs. And guys, I have to be honest with you. I mean, I've got managers in the big leagues right now that are former players, former students. I've got GMs, assistant GMs, and I find it so awesome that I've been able to give that opportunity back. And when I look back at my career, I'm as proud of that as I am how far I rose in the ranks on the baseball side because I directly impact people and their families for the rest of their careers. And there's no way to measure that. One of them just called me on Saturday and they're expecting a child. And I'm just like, I remember when they were a 19-year-old college student and now they're up for a GM job. And it's like, okay, this is cool. And the give back is so pure. I get to teach with Hank Jones, one of my former staff in Los Angeles. And to be honest with you guys, it's a blast. I mean, we have people literally we've had over 100 countries represented. So it's remarkable that we have people in Cameroon, people in Taiwan, people in Europe and all across, North America, South America. It's fascinating, but it just shows you how this little white ball can take you anywhere. I mean, I can't believe the places I've been to, and it's all because of that little baseball. And I'm not done. I mean, I'm nowhere near done. And I don't want to be done because I've got so much more to contribute and a lot of energy to do it.
Dan, where can people, just for the audience that's watching and listening, if they're interested in learning more about your course, please let people know so we can share that.
Yeah, you can go on the Sports Management Worldwide website. It's baseball, GM, and scouting. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on Blue Sky. I'm on Twitter. I'm on every social media platform because I try to hype what we do and what I do in my various world. I mean, I'm in Sabre as a board of director.
Yes,
I
sir.
do a lot of other really fun things, but for me, what I just try to do is get the message out there that I'm there to help and I'm there to guide if in fact you look for that. And it's great. I mean, we have a lot of fun doing it, but at the same time, the coolest thing, guys, is to hear the success stories later on and knowing that you had a little bit to do with it. It's just awesome.
Well, I gotta think, earlier we were talking about, and you said baseball's in a golden age right now, and I think you might be able to pat yourself a little bit on the back there, given how much you've gotten into getting a current crop of GMs and scouts involved. That you might help put that to get golden age together just a little bit.
Well, it's kind of fun when you go to the winter meetings late at night, 11, 12 o'clock, and everybody's mingling, networking. And I was in there a couple of years ago. Corey Schwartz of MLB.com is a great friend. And he goes, dude, do you know everybody in this bar? And I said, yeah, I worked with most of them. I worked against others, and the rest of them took my class. And I said, it's not so bad. And I said, and if I drank, it would be really dangerous because I would never have to buy a drink here. So, the game is a wonderful game, as you guys know. But the best part of the game is the people, not the strategy. And, I've really dwelled on that a lot in my last 10 years or so because I just felt it was the right direction to go. So a lot of things in my career led to fun things just because I wanted to have fun doing it.
You know, So we're going to insist that you come back because I think we covered like 25% of what we thought we were going to talk to you about, because there's so much. I mean, we could get into a whole thing about the difference between GMing today versus what it was when you were doing it, because of technology and iPhones and all that kind of stuff. But we'll save that for another podcast. What I really appreciate from you is you said it when you started, like, you're a fan, and I get that from you the whole time. Like, look, this guy knows everybody. He's done everything. He's a baseball guy through and through. But you make me feel like, gee, if I'd known everybody and I'd done this for 40 years, I could be just like Dan. And I think that's so approachable to make me, and I assume Gordon feels the same way.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, you're not above everybody. You're like the rest of us. You just happen to work in the game for 40 years and know everybody.
I had great parents. I had a great family that really gave me a real good, I would say, quality of being a good person. And then I was around phenomenal people, as I talked about earlier. And I've surrounded myself with good people throughout my life, between my family and my friends, my core friends. And I just didn't ever veer from being that guy. But guys, I have to be honest. For me, the biggest rush I still get is I go to a crowded ballpark. I get some kettle corn. I get a Diet Coke. I get a hot dog or a brat. And I just sit there and immerse myself in the sport. I mean, one of the most glorious things I have in my career is I have a lifetime pass. And I was given it by Bud Selig 20 years ago, and I didn't realize how much I would use it. And I use it, and I sit in different parts of the ballpark, and I just love sitting around the diehard fans in the outfield, the people in the upper deck, the people in the bar who are checking the girls out. And all these different people are there for different reasons. But if you ask me at any point, what's the count? Who's up? What's the situation? Totally dialed in. But for me, it's the buzz of the crowd. It's the noise. It's just the vibe of being in a ballpark, eating popcorn, eating kettle corn. And just that is, for me, is what I live for. And I don't care what ballpark it is, if it's a Northwoods League game, if it's a Cape Cod game, it's a Iowa Cubs game. I don't care. I just love being in the crowd. And I'm glad I never lost that, because had I lost it, I would have got the hell out of the game. And I never did. So as a result, it was like, oh, you mean I have to go to Tokyo to go scout somebody? Oh, hell yeah, I'll do that. Let's go.
That works.
That's right.
Well, I think, you mentioned, you come from good stock, good parents and all that, but I think you're one of the good people in the game, and the game is lucky to have you involved, still being involved, still wanting to be involved, not being done. We don't want you to be done. In fact, we want you to come back real soon, and so we can cover other stuff, Dan, because it's been just a delight talking with you. And from me, thank you very much for taking the time to spend with us.
Yeah, thank you. It's been an amazing time.
Thanks a bunch, guys. And in the background, if anyone's wondering, that's Koshin Stadium in Osaka, Japan, the home of the Hanshin Tigers and their national baseball tournament. And that's my favorite ballpark in the world.
Wow.
So I really appreciate the invite, and I look forward to coming back with you guys again.
Thanks, Dan.
Thank you.